Today we're going to be talking about studying the text through Bible translations.
Now over here, I keep my Bibles. Now let me show you the original Bible, the one that is the authoritative source. This is a Greek New Testament, and this is a Hebrew Old Testament. The Greek and the Hebrew are the original Bibles, and if you're going to do very serious Bible study, you need to be able to be familiar with the Greek and the Hebrew. Now this whole shelf is a sample of the various Bibles that I own and that I use. You may wonder how many Bibles there are. There are dozens. And you may wonder, how come there are so many different translations? Well, let's take a moment and explain that.
This is a page from the original Greek Bible. As you can see, there's probably few of you who can read this. Now, there are some changes between the original manuscripts and what you see, and even in the Greek text as we have it today. For one thing, there are no verses in the original Greek translations, manuscripts. That means that there's no division of chapter or verses. Not only that, but the pronunciation marks that you see over many of the Greek letters were not there. Capitals were not there, and neither were breaks between words. You had one successive long string of letters that had to be read. Needless to say, translating from the original Greek manuscripts is not an easy task, and it requires a lot of skill and a lot of practice to do so. Fortunately for us, better scholars than ourselves have divided the Greek translations, or the Greek manuscripts, up into words and into pronunciation, and added the grammatical marks. Here is a page from the literal Greek translation, which is called an interlinear. In this translation, someone has written the literal words underneath the Greek words, the literal English words underneath the Greek words. But as you look at John 3:16, you realize that it really does not look at all like what we say today, that the order of the words are entirely different in Greek, which is another challenge to people who translate the Bible. That is the reason that we have produced many English translations. Now, English translations differ from one another in two specific ways. First of all, they differ in readability. Some are more readable than others. Others differ because of literal accuracy. In some cases, the translator has leaned more upon readability and less upon accuracy, and in other cases, they've leaned more upon accuracy and less on readability. So you can see in translations that the greater the accuracy, the lower the readability. So you want to have translations that hit in several places on this continuum so that you get a good picture of what's going on. All right, now let's see a listing of Bibles according to their readability. As you can see in this chart, the King James Bible is written on approximately an 11th grade reading level. That's the same as Shakespeare. New American Standard Bible is on a 9th grade reading level. The NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version, the New International Version, the English Standard Version, the Holcomb Christian Standard Bible are all written about the same as a newspaper on a 7th or 8th grade reading level. The New Living Translation and the Good News Bible were written on a 5th or 6th grade reading level, so they should be fine for older children. There are also Bibles that are written for even simpler people. Common English Bible, the Children's NIV Bible were all written to be understood on a 3rd or 4th grade reading level. Here's a list of translations according to the literal rendering of the original text. In the Greek, the NASB stands out and the ASB stands out to preserve the literal idioms and most of the variants of the Greek, where there is more than one manuscript and they disagree on each other. In the New American Standard, they will usually put the best one into the text and put the alternate in the margins. The Old King James Version is probably the most literal in the Old Testament. It preserves a lot of the Hebrewisms and the idioms that other translations simply translate into a more modern English idiom. The other translations that we use, the main ones, the NIV, the ESV, HCSB, the NRSV, are dynamic equivalent translations. They balance the meaning and the literalness, trying to get as close as they can to the original meaning, but at the same time make it readable. So they change some of those idioms that the King James and NASB keep in. The New Living Translation and the Good News Translation are loose translations in a sense. They favor readability over accuracy. They're probably not the best translations for use on a serious Bible study, on a sermon, though they may be part of your study. The Living Bible, the Phillips translation, and the Message are paraphrases. They are not translations at all, but actual paraphrases from the English to make them more readable or more interesting. They're useful in our studies, but they would not want to be we don't want them to be our main Bibles when it comes to studying a passage for preaching. So if you're reading the text of the Bible, read it in its original Greek or Hebrew. And if you don't know its original Greek or Hebrew or find that difficult, do the next best thing, which is to read it in 2 or 3 different translations. Here are my suggestions for how to use translations. First of all, for general reading, read a comfortable newspaper-level Bible, one that you can pick up and read without straining too hard to read it. Otherwise, you may get frustrated and put it aside. Second, for accurate reading, read a more literal translation. When you're really getting down to serious Bible study, you want to get your translation as accurately as possible. For very accurate reading, go to the Greek. And if you don't know the Greek, learn enough Greek so that you can use Greek tools. And finally, remember, read more than one translation unless you only want one slant. It's also important to know the slant of your translation. Remember, human beings have translated the Bible from the divinely inspired Greek and Hebrew. So when human beings have done that, they put their own slant on them. Just like commentaries have a slant, so Bibles have a little bit of a slant. For example, the King James was translated by the Church of England back in the 17th century. And so the perspective of the King James Bible is going to reflect the 18th century or 17th century Church of England. The New English Bible is one of the Catholic translations, and it may have somewhat of a Catholic slant to it. The NRSV is favored by the mainline Protestant churches, such as the United Methodist Church, the Lutheran Church, the Presbyterian Church USA, whereas the NIV Bible is found in more evangelical, conservative Bible-believing churches. The Holman Christian Standard Version was translated by the Southern Baptist Church, partially to keep from having to pay royalties for their Sunday school material, but it is a good translation. The English Standard Version, another good translation, was translated by the Reformed churches, that is Presbyterian Reformed, and especially Conservative Presbyterian and Reformed. The New World Translation, if you should ever get a hold of a copy of that, is done by the Jehovah's Witness and contains some significant inaccuracies because of that. Just remember that always find out where your translation has come from before you use it.